Okay, in the interest of time, let's get going here. Thanks everyone for joining us again today. Second in our Masterclass series, looking at AI for BI, focusing this time on looking for the right technologies, making the right technology selections. As usual, some housekeeping items. This is being recorded. We're going to send this out obviously afterwards. It will also be up on our YouTube channel once the recording is processed. So if you need to share it, look out for it there. We will be taking Q&A. Obviously, lines are muted as usual, but we will be taking Q&A. Feel free to enter questions in the Q&A or the chat windows. Feel free to chat in there. We'll take a look at those towards the end. We'll leave some time at the end to answer anything that comes in. Um, with that, I'll hand it over to Marius again today, who's going to be taking us through the slides. So, Marius, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks all for joining again, and let's jump right in. So today we're going to talk about looking at the right tools and technologies around AI for BI. And just to remind everyone, this is the second in our webinar series, in our masterclass series, rather. So if you missed the 10 fastest ways to fail session, it is available on YouTube. Feel free to go check it out there. Today we'll be talking about tools and technology. And then upcoming in 3 weeks, we'll have a deeper dive into the implementation playbook. What are the various tasks that you need to be thinking about, activities are required, and these kinds of implementations. And then finally, we'll have a wrap-up session where we really look into some of the actual examples, show you some things in practice so you can see how it all comes together. So with that, let's jump right in. So let's talk about tooling and technology. And before we get into the nuts and bolts of technology choices and landscape and so forth, I think it's helpful to take a moment to think about what are the expectations that a business user has of an AI for BI system that you deploy, right? The agent that you put in front of them and your capabilities you create. And I think to start and to kind of unwrap that question, it's helpful to think about, how is it that a really proficient analyst in your organization operates, and what are the expectations that a user has of a human analyst? Because in many ways, AI for BI is about deploying an agent that is essentially like a virtual analyst, right? It's an analyst that you're deploying to everyone in your organization, and you're offloading the overhead that would normally come to your human analyst to answer mundane, easy questions, and you're basically allowing them to focus on the really hard stuff, right? This is thinking from that lens, right? There's obviously the conversational AI component, right? And there it's all about, you ask a question, right? This is equivalent to you asking a human analyst something in Teams or Slack. You expect the agent to analyze the data and then give you an answer, right? What were my sales last week? What's happening with this particular area of the business, et cetera, et cetera, right? And you get an answer, and then of course, oftentimes there might be a follow-up question. Our target isn't performing. We're not meeting target expectations. Well, why not? What's driving that, and so forth, right? So having that conversation that is user initiated, where the user asks the analyst the question, in this case, the agent. But if you think of any sort of BI analyst with their salt in the organization, the expectations that a business person has of them, they're expecting more than that, right? They're expecting the analyst to be aware of what's going on in the business and to be able to bring up issues proactively, right? Because, they're deep in the data. So you're expecting that for the things that matter, that analyst detects meaningful changes that are happening on those most important metrics for the business, that when they see that something material has happened, hey, we were trending to meet our sales goals, and now all of a sudden we're not. Well, doing some kind of root cause analysis on that and figuring out, well, why are we not meeting it? And then proactively alerting the person that's involved in that on the business that could take action on it, right? To say, hey, reaching out to the VP of sales or the director of sales for a particular region and saying, "Hey, heads up, it looks like we're trending. Some of these deals are not closing as quickly as we were planning on, and we're at risk of missing our number in next month if we don't do something about it now." So that's something that certainly people expect, and the same thing would happen. It's something that you want to make sure that you have in your agentic system. So the two modalities are very important, and of course you want to be able to move between these two modalities in a very fluid way, right? So, as an example, maybe you find there's a spike in support ticket volume. You ask a question. You notice on a dashboard that there's a high number of product returns compared to usual as a business user. You then might go out and ask a question of the agent to say, "Hey, what's causing this spike in volume? Why do we have more support tickets than we were expecting?" And the agent may respond and say, "Hey, the supplier X is in financial difficulty based on the information I've got here. And it looks like we missed a bunch of POs, have a lot of defective products, and that's causing issues with returns. And as a result, there's a problem with support." The tickets that are being created as a result of those returns. So, it gives you the root cause analysis, tells you what's going on as the user. And then you, as the user, may say to the agent, "Well, hey, look, this is great. Hey, I want to know. Let me know if this particular issue, if this metric doesn't come back to my expectations within the next week, I want to know about it. Or if there are any more PO issues for this particular customer, let me know because I'm gonna follow up on it with the supplier, and I want to make sure that if there's anything else that comes up, it happens." So I'm kind of telling the agent to alert me in the future if something takes place. So you can see here how the two sides, the user starting the conversation, asking a question, getting an answer, and then based on that, potentially informing the agent how they might want to interact with them in the future and reach out. That those two pieces really need to fit together the same way that they would if you were having a conversation with a human agent, a human BI analyst. Okay, so with that context in mind, let's take a look at what is the technology landscape, right? For the tooling that you're going to be deploying, if you're thinking about building AI for BI system in your enterprise, what are kind of your choices at a high level? And they basically fall into five categories. And there's tools they're add-ons for the BI tools themselves. There's the ability to leverage some of the legacy, sort of what was previously called search-driven analytics tools. There's cloud database providers that provide all kinds of capabilities that you can leverage into. There's AI native solutions. So these are startups, companies that have come up since the AI revolutions come in and have completely from the ground up AI capabilities. And finally, there are roll your own agent orchestration platforms. So let's look for a moment at what each of these categories contains and what are the characteristics of solutions in those particular categories. So BI add-ons. So think here of like Tableau Pulse, Power BI Copilot, Gemini and Looker. Almost every BI tool now has some kind of AI capability that you can enable directly in the tool. And some of those AI capabilities are focused at analysts building reports, but largely we're going to focus here on the items where the capability is focused on the end user helping analysis, right? So if a user asks a question, then basically what's happening is that the BI tool is interrogating its own local data and it's answering the question with that data. So the scope is limited to that dashboard data by definition in these solutions. It's leveraging the dashboard semantic model. So if you've got joins that if you've defined within the Tableau or Power BI semantic model, those things are going to be leveraged in answering the question. In some cases, it even sort of updates the report for you based on what you're saying, focuses on a particular area, et cetera, if you're asking about something that's relevant to a filter that's in the report. And the key thing to remember here is that there's some utility here in potentially interacting with the dashboard, but these are fairly limited because the scope is constrained by the dashboard data itself. So oftentimes users of these systems, in fact, most of the time, your user of your dashboard doesn't really understand intuitively where the the scope of the data for the dashboard end. Where does the dashboard end, and where is the data that else in the system that you don't actually have access to through the dashboard. So one of the challenges of these systems is how do you deploy them in a way that users don't ask questions that can be answered elsewhere, but cannot be answered directly in the dashboard data as it exists today. A second category is these what were previously called legacy search-driven analytics tools. So here you can think about products like ThoughtSpot, like AnswerRocket, like Tellius, and these existed well before the ChatGPT moment arrived. They used a prior generation of natural language processing to take a question that you'd have, convert it into SQL, and then go and present the results back to you. And what's happened is that since and after the ChatGPT moment, after models started coming out, all these tools have switched over to using, of course, generative AI to generate those SQL statements and get the results. And they have use semantic models that are natively created within the tools. So if you're using these tools, you do need to build a semantic model within that particular technology using their definition. So there's a significant amount of work required usually to get those up there running. But once that's there, that semantic model is used to generate some higher quality results for questions that get answered. And then in many cases, they can also extend the scope of questions that are asked to unstructured data, so via MCP integration. So here, unlike the dashboard example, where you're always limited to what the dashboard contains, here the question can span structured information that's in the semantic model, and then in some cases it can make out external MCP calls to other things as well. Now, your mileage will vary in terms of how effective these things are. So definitely evaluation is very important as far as correctly routing question to the right external data source, combining external data sources with the structured data. The devil's in the details when it comes to those implementations and how effective it will work for you, but the capabilities are certainly there. So then another option, this is very popular. In fact, many people start here, is leveraging the capabilities that cloud database providers give you. I mean, after all, your data is already in Snowflake or in Databricks or in Fabric. And here you can leverage the AI agents that they provide to hook up to the capabilities, ask questions, leverage the semantic models there, and work directly to answer the data questions. And so all of these systems are organized into data domains where there's a set of tables, or in the case of Fabric, it could be semantic models from Power BI that are organized into a domain. Think of domain like a HR, finance data, maybe even specific sections of that particular functional breakdown of your data. And then you can ask questions of it because it's leveraged as a native semantic model. So they can if you're using Fabric, for instance, you can use the semantic model. Power BI, so that all the joins are predefined there. In the case of Snowflake, you might use YAML files to define all the joins, or you might use semantic views, or in Databricks, it might be leveraging the Databricks catalog that's there. So a variety of different techniques are used to enhance and provide high level of accuracy on the queries by leveraging correct semantics in place. And these systems also enable, cross-domain kind of agentic analysis capabilities, right? So as the underlying models have improved, the capabilities that these systems use have also improved. And now you can ask, you're not necessarily limited to one domain. You can ask a question, and the agent will figure out, okay, I need to go across and ask a question from HR, combine some of that data together with the data from finance. Of course, you're also leveraging all of the security at the user level and at the row level security constraints that are in place. Then if you go a little further afield, there are solutions that are not tied to any specific a cloud database environment, and so therefore they're able to be much more flexible, shall we say, in the sense that you can cross over many different domains. And these are the AI native solutions. So here you're talking about Wisdom AI, tools like Lumi, like Defog AI, technologies where they were built custom from the ground up with AI for BI as the sole sort of solution that they're trying to solve thing they're trying to solve. And they work with both structured and unstructured data because obviously AI systems typically work effectively in both. You can bring in business context from many sources. You can point them to your data catalogs, bring data from there. You can have PDFs, any number of places which you can access and kind of consolidate your context information in that way, and they'll index it and try to use it in building the queries. Um, and they'll also typically have out of the box event-driven AI capabilities. So, when we talked about that dichotomy at the beginning of both the pull and the push, where it's either the user asks a question or the AI is going to give you the answer without being asked, unprompted. These tools will have both, whereas generally speaking, the other options that we've talked about so far will just have the conversational aspect of it, where it's the pull, where the user asks a question in order for it to be answered. Then the final sort of option on the table, as you look at what you might want to do and how you want to implement, right, would be the agent orchestration platforms. So here you think about like Google Vertex ADK or Bedrock Agent Core in AWS ecosystem or Azure's Agent Framework. These are roll your own frameworks that are available with the capabilities rather that you where you can write an agent in Python or whatever language you might want to use and then deploy that into a framework which handles authentication through OAuth and and all the handles security and instrumentation and observability and all the things that you might need in an agent. So with this option, you're basically building everything yourself, but you can have a lot of complexity around reasoning and planning. You can use whatever model you wish. You're not bound to whatever model the tool vendor has chosen to use, and you can do scaffolding if you want to do it with a workflow. You can make it just have a general agentic loop. Sort of the world is your oyster here because it's very unrestricted. Um, Similarly, you've got the ability to go cross silo because you can use combine SQL information with PDF information and make API calls, connect to whatever MCP servers you want. Again, you're coding it, so it's whatever you want to do. And governance is again also apart from the fact that there's out of the box governance that's available through the fact that single sign on and so forth are provided for you. You can do further governance within the application as you wish from a developer perspective. So this is by far the most flexible approach. It also obviously requires, in many cases, a lot more work from you because you're not starting with a tool that does a whole bunch of things out of the box. You're just starting with a set of capabilities that you've got to put together and code to make happen. But in many cases, if it for there are use cases where maybe some of the other tools just simply don't fit. There's capability gaps and so forth, and doing something custom absolutely makes sense, especially in the age of agentic coding and so forth. It's often possible to get these things up and running a lot faster than it would have been 6, 9 months ago where every line of code had to be written by a human. So we've gone through the different kind of silos, and I think one of the things we were going to do here is give opportunity for all of you to just tell us via poll, and we'll share here at the end with everyone what the answer is, what people are saying. What technologies has your organization looked at? Have you looked at BI add-ons? Have you looked at legacy search? Have you looked at cloud databases, AI native solutions? Or agent orchestration. You can pick as many of the ones that you have actually explored. I think it will be interesting for everyone on the call here to see what others have been looking at, and we'll review that at the end. So please do that while we proceed with the rest of the webinar. Okay, so now that we've looked at kind of the landscape, let's focus a bit on, well, how do you evaluate these things, right? Because and I want to stress that it's important not to make the evaluation at a myopic level, kind of at an individual tool level, but rather really evaluate a solution that you're planning. And the reason is very simple here. You're unlikely over time, especially, to have just a single piece in place, a single technology in place. Right? Most enterprises, there are going to be some people that are going to be building a bunch of bots using the frameworks that we talked about over time. Because the orchestration platforms are fairly easy to use. It is easy to code these agents. So you're going to have some of those come up in the organization. You probably have some capabilities you might want to unlock from your database providers. Maybe someone goes out there and buys a product that they want to pull into this. So you want to evaluate not just individual component that you're putting in place, but rather your overall system for AI for BI that you're going to be deploying within your enterprise. And everything we're going to talk about today is going to be in light of that. So you're kind of saying, okay, here's the individual components I'm putting together, and then evaluating the system as a whole to say, does it do these things that are going to be necessary to be successful? So the other thing that's very important as we look at this is you want the evaluation that you look at to consider the fact that you're not starting from zero in BI, right? This is not going to be the thing that people all of a sudden drop all their dashboards, drop all their existing, reports that they're using across whatever tools you have in place and start using exclusively. That's not going to happen. Instead, what's going to happen is that this has to complement the solutions that are already in place. It needs to extend and improve and generate more value out of your current BI investments. So really thinking carefully about how these things is going to fit together into and fit into your ecosystem, into your BI ecosystem is super important. And then finally, you want to look at this really with this outcome centric lens because at the end of the day, it's about the end user journey, right? So it's what is the journey that the user is going to go from the point in time where they want to have a question to the point in time where they get the answer. How is that going to work? If are they going to be at the in the looking at a dashboard and is that going to prompt the question? What if they're just thinking of it while they're on their way to work? Can they interact with it that way? Looking at all the modalities that where you want to interact with the user, whether it's pull or push, and make sure that you've got kind of an end-to-end user journey that seamlessly integrates both your legacy BI investments together with your AI for BI investment and produces the kinds of outcomes that your users expect. So, what are the expectations that users have? What are the things that we want to evaluate from a criteria perspective? Well, the good news or the bad news, I guess, is that everybody has been using AI tools, the consumer AI tools, and the consumer grade expectations are quite high, right? Your users are coming to the table expecting kind of a consumer-like experience inside of your ecosystem, and they're expecting it to be, of course, to be as intuitive as ChatGPT, but with rigor and security and all the things that governance and all that in place. And that's a pretty high bar, right? Just frankly. And that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, in these deployments. Because, when you look at something like ChatGPT or Gemini, well, with a very simple interface, I can do everything from, get recipes to do deep research on a stock to generate images to, you name it, right? You can do all these things. It's very, very flexible and all encompassing. Whereas by definition, anything you do within your ecosystem has got to be much more boxed in as far as capabilities, right? You can't possibly deploy something in your environment that can do everything, especially not immediately. So navigating this is something that you need to be aware of. It needs to be discussions you have to have with your business when you're deploying it. But you want to keep in mind that those expectations are going to be there in the back of people's minds, especially people that have not been informed about what their model is able to do, what your AI for BI solution does, and what it does not do. So that's really going to be something, especially when we talk in the next few webinars, you'll want to inform the process and the planning process with the fact that this expectation is certainly there. Okay? And there are a few silos around which kind of like or areas around which you want to look at criteria, right? When you look at your overall architecture to test it to see, okay, does it look like it's going to adhere to at least a baseline of user expectations? So the first one is that your users are going to expect real world business problems to be solved, right? So the question is, can what you're putting together, does it integrate the necessary business context to in order to answer the kinds of questions that users expect to answer? Do you have that context somewhere? Can you bring it in? And does the system that you've put together have a way to easily ingest it? Similarly, can it pull in external events as context? So again, going back to the good analyst example, right? A good analyst not only is able to look at what is going on in the data, but that person can say, well, wait a minute, what externalities are happening? Did we have a weather event that might have contributed to the fact that sales were low in this particular store? Was there particularly, maybe a really rough storm in the Northeast, and so that's why our sales in this area in this period are low? Did we have a supply shock that happened was there a problem with a supplier that I could actually find out by even just looking in our information sources or on the public internet, etc. All those things are kind of, you expect somebody to do their homework and figure out. So the same thing, you want to be thinking not just about data, but about how any externalities that inform what's happening in the data that are relevant to the use cases that you're solving, and making sure that your solution has a way to provide and integrate that in. Similarly, I think you're expecting your analyst to go beyond a one-step process, right? And this is one of the areas where I think people oftentimes make the mistake, and they underestimate the expectation here, right? Your users expect why questions to be answered, and so you want to be able to not only look at what happened, but why did it happen, which requires agentic multi-step reasoning to accomplish. So if you're deploying something that doesn't have agentic multi-step reasoning in it, you're probably not going to be able to meet the expectations. Another area of where you want to really evaluate your tool to assess is around kind of your intuitive and flexible user interface experience, right? So can I, as a user of the system, ask a question and specifically target it towards a given domain? If I've got access to all these different domains, but I want to ask, I know this is a finance question, I want to be very specific. Don't answer it from other areas, just answer it from the information I have related to finance. I should be able to pick that and ask the domain directly the question. Similarly, I should be able to, as a user, not care about knowing what domain I need to ask the question of, and just simply ask the question, and the agent, intelligently figure out what domain should be asked, and potentially maybe multiple domains should be asked, and the best question should be selected. So, making it possible for both be specific within domain architecture when you care about it, you know something about it, but if you don't, be able to intelligently do routing across multiple domains. And of course, if you deploy one bot, one domain, it's not going to matter. But you want to be thinking about your architecture and your system as in terms of how are you going to handle the second and the third and the fourth domain that you want to add to it. And handling cross-domain questions comes part and parcel of this. So if I have access to both revenue and support data, then I should be able to ask a question, for my top 10 customers, how much support have they been requiring over the last 6 months? And the system, whatever system you've implemented, should be smart enough to be able to figure out, well, I need to get some of that information from the finance domain, and then I need to get some information from the support domain, and I need to kind of combine that together to generate an answer. And then finally, from a UX pattern perspective, from how the bot interacts with, or the agent interacts with the human, you don't want to innovate in this area. This is if you're coming up with a completely new experience that you can't anchor to something you see in Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude, you're doing it wrong, right? So don't. This is not an area of innovation. Use UX patterns that people are going to be comfortable with, that they're familiar with from the consumer products. Next area is looking at accuracy and reliability. And this is incredibly important, right? Because everybody that's used generative systems knows that they hallucinate. And it is vitally important that if they're going to make decisions off the data, they need to be able to trust that that what you're giving them in an answer from an AI agent is accurate. So sort of table stakes here, the solution needs to show thought traces at the level of detail that's relevant to the user. So if it's a solution intended for an analyst, it's okay to show SQL. If it's intended for a business user, it's not, right? The thought trace should be more logically framed. But I want to be able to understand, okay, how did you come up with this, right? What was the logic that went from my question to generating the answer, so that I can at least at a high level gain some confidence that the right approach has been taken. Um, Continuous improvement through feedback is critical. So this takes the form of metadata enrichment over time. If somebody this can be done centrally through administrative privileges. It can be also done when users provide feedback directly, and they'll say, hey, this answer is not correct. Well, I know that I don't want to follow that path. If I know that I have a correct answer, then I want to be able to reinforce the model to basically say, well, now I know, don't reinvent how you're going to do the SQL. If we know that the SQL is correct to answer this kind of question, store that information, and then when you have another question that's similar to the one that's been asked, use that template to generate the answer. So being sophisticated in that, so that does continuous improvement, and as you're using it, it gets better, is very important. Verifying findings using other sources. So again, going back to the last point that we made at the architecture level, right? It's users already have dashboards. So if you and those dashboards oftentimes have been certified and they've been vetted and they've been using them all along. So if they ask a question and you give them the answer, but that answer can also be sort of sanity checked in a dashboard that they have access to, well, you should point them to that, and they should go there so that they have that ability to go and do that sanity check and be comfortable with the answer. And then finally, the idea that can you establish with whatever tool you have an internal validation baseline that you can continuously validate against as you're making changes, right? So that you know that at least at a base level, the most important questions that you're expecting to get answered, it's going to answer correctly. So if you don't have a validation framework, or you don't have a way to get validation into your solution and test it, then that's pretty much I think, a showstopper, and you need to solve for that before you deploy anything. So security and compliance, obviously very important. So it goes without saying, you may have many domains. Users should only be able to see or even know about the domains that they can actually access, right? You don't want clutter into, like, if I don't have access to a HR domain, I shouldn't see it in my experience. And then similarly, but I do want to see everything that I have access to. I expect RLS to be enforced. So if I'm accessing an agent and that has data that has row level security, where I should only be able to see certain rows of the data, you have to make sure that that's enforced from a compliance perspective. And then, single sign-on is a given, right? Nobody wants to have to log into your bot every time. So, the OAuth is the standard here, and it should be an implementation of OAuth where I can OAuth once, and then the token is kept, and then that token is reused to generate, additional session tokens, and therefore, I don't have to continuously sign on to the system to get answers. And then you want to make sure that there's security awareness in the user interaction patterns, right? So if I ask a question for something that exists, but I don't have access to in the data, or if it's role level specific, but the question implies that I want to do something across the board, you should be able to have the ways to steer your agent so that it can tell me, hey, you know what, you don't. You asked for how we're doing overall. You actually don't have access to sales information overall. Here's how you're doing in your territory, right? That kind of thing. The fact that it knows that when it's running a question, it's actually running it in a security aware fashion for your user with row level security. So additionally, right, to generate high quality, we need to make sure that whatever you do is grounded by the knowledge you have in an organization, because you're not just dealing with publicly available information. You're dealing with companies' knowledge. Companies have very specific information that has to be fed in. So beyond data, right? So for example, I need to be able to understand the products and services. So is there a way to easily bring in all the product and services information into the AI infrastructure and inform the questions that get asked? Can we keep that maintained in an automatic way so that when there is a new product that comes online, that the bot automatically knows about it, right? can we make aware, is the agent aware to a user's role and how they fit within the organization? So if I'm a sales rep asking how are things going, how is sales versus target, I'm asking about my territory. If I'm a regional manager, I'm probably asking about the region. If I'm a VP, or if I'm asking about the whole thing, right? So the idea being that you wanna have a sense of, based on who the person is, where they fit in the organization, that may have the question that they ask could be interpreted very differently. And so having a role awareness is very important. And then similarly, terminology is very important. So every single organization has abbreviations, has kind of internal nomenclature that's used, and it's very important to have a way to be able to pull in all of that into the context, so that the agent that you're working with, your AI for BI system, is able to kind of converse with that language. Because otherwise, the user is going to ask a question that's going to have no idea what's being asked. And then finally, semantic model understanding is also like absolutely critical. So, as we talked about in the last webinar, if you don't have a semantic model, you can't possibly have any quality in your responses. You're just sort of generating SQL statements on the fly, and the accuracy level there is going to be nowhere near what it needs to be in order to satisfy your users. So, making sure that you've got some level of semantic model and that you trust the semantic model you're using, and that can be ingested into your solution is vitally important. So, given you've got all that, now accessibility is very important, right? So if you look at the user experience, you need to be able to have it be the AI for BI agent has to be accessible wherever the user might be. So if they're accessing their dashboard, it needs to be something they can pop open right there as they're looking at their dashboard, and they go, oh, wait a minute, I see something here. I have a question about it. I want to be able to pop open an agent and be able to ask a question there. I also want to be able to have accessible in the places where I work and live, right? So if I'm in Teams all the time, I'm in Slack all the time, I should be able to ask the questions there, so that if I'm in the car, or on my way to work or whatever, I want to be able to interact, and perhaps these systems will push informations and alerts and things to me there as well, right? So it can be both directly. But the point is that that experience should be present there, so I don't have to be on my web. And then if you have an enterprise AI gateway or tooling, if you're using Glean, or the Gemini Enterprise, or any of these solutions where you're basically putting a front face in front of all the tools, not just the BI tools for your enterprise, you want the solution to plug into that seamlessly, right? So that if I am opening up that AI gateway and I'm asking a question that relates to BI, that question gets routed over to the BI system, to your agentic system, and the response is received that way. Okay, so we've kind of gone through the high level landscape. We've gone through some of the key criteria you want to evaluate your solution around, but let's zoom out at this point. Let's talk about the big picture, right? What are the things that are going to drive success or failure here? So I think most importantly, I think the one thing, one most important takeaway, I think, is that you want to remember that really user experience is the beginning, the middle, and the end here, right? In that, in the end, if you look at the individual checkboxes, what you satisfy, what you don't, what your solution is, which technology you're using, you add it all up and you measure it against how is the user going to experience your system. If you don't have high level of accuracy and ease of use, you're not going to get adoption, and it's going to fail, right? So the user experience is king. It's what your North Star. It's what matters. And you always want to come back to that at the end. Don't get lost in all the details. Certainly look at the details, understand but then how your solution maps against the criteria. But then take a holistic view at the end and bubble it up and say, is this solution that for the use cases that my users expect to get answers for, is it going to provide an accurate, high level of accuracy for the questions, and is it going to be easy for them to use, which includes performance from a perspective of what they expect from in terms of responses, and provide available everywhere they need to, and providing the information in a way that they can consume. The other thing to realize is that you're not going to get this perfect on the get-go. It's everybody's learning, everybody's evolving in their organizations, and tooling itself is changing. And so you've got to take an iterative approach here, and you've got to take the approach thinking that it's going to take a bit to get to a point where you have a broad-based adoption of these technologies within the enterprise. Most people are very much at the early stages of deploying these kinds of systems. So if that's the perspective, if it's going to be something that's going to take a little bit of time and a few iterations to get going, it's critical that you measure everything and have those measurements in place from the beginning. So understand, what are people asking? How accurate are the responses? Understand, look at engagement within the system, but also measure it externally and ask the community on a regular basis, whatever your early user groups, how they're experiencing the system, what else do they want, see where it's getting stuck. Make sure that you've got all the instrumentation in place at every stage, not both on the technical and from a interaction with the business perspective, to really know where you are and make the necessary adjustments as you need to make. Then flexibility, right, is very important. As we see now, every single one of these technologies are evolving quickly. The capabilities, even of the tools I just presented, the different categories of tools. If I were talking about it, 6 months ago, it would be a much more primitive set of tooling. So everything's moving so quickly that we need to make sure that whatever architecture you put together is adaptable, that is future-proofed, that you can say, well, if some other technology comes in that I want to plug into this, can I do that? Do I see a way that I'm going to be able to really evolve my architecture so that it's not so rigid that I'm stuck into whatever I decide to do as a first step? So having a flexible mindset and a flexible architecture is very important. Okay, so what are the next steps that you should take? Well, first of all, go out there and make sure you understand and document your high level value use cases. So if, again, going back to the idea, if experience is your North Star, unless you understand the use cases, you don't know if your solution is doing what it needs to do. Second, since you need context to be able to generate accuracy, make sure you understand where's that context coming from. Is it coming from your data catalogs? Are you going to have to source it all manually? Is there a path by which you can bring the context that you need in order to support use cases into your system in a way that is, that's not so labor intensive that it's going to be prohibitive? If you cross that gate, now you're ready to look at how your technical solution is going to work for your particular requirements. Which technologies are you going to use? How are you going to put them together in the architecture and validate that against your use cases and the context landscape you have to make sure that it's going to work effectively. And then finally, you start small in the sense of you take a particular representative user group that's going to be a little bit more forgiving, and build out a first use case with them, then expand that use case to everyone that needs to consume it, and then kind of keep on going and iterating using a future-proof architecture that allows you to iterate and expand and increase capabilities over time. Okay, so that's that. So Mike, I'll hand it back to you. I think I took up almost all the time here.
It's all
I,
good.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for that, Marius. A lot of info there. I know we're coming up against time. There's a couple of questions. So for those that can hang around, we'll stay and answer those. I just shared our poll as well. I think it's perhaps not surprising that, and I think you can see that, Marius, right?
Yes, yes.
Not surprising. It sort of leans towards the in-tool capabilities of the
Hmm.
BI tools and the database providers. I feel like that's the easy route to take is to go there. I think the important thing is to, think about all the things that you've just covered if you are going to turn those tools on.
Hmm.
Um, so there's a couple of questions there, Marius. I don't know whether you can see those. So one around automating the process of sort of improving knowledge in the organization, so of the organization, so that AI for BI is not hallucinating. How do you take this from a very manual effort to being more automated?
Yeah. So that's a great question, and I think that's very important. And just like the question I asked mentions Calibra and other things. So you look at what's available. If you have data catalog tools, then they have a wealth of information, provided that there's that's they're being maintained. In which case, then again, you look at the use case, then you say, well, now what kind of metadata do I need for this? What kind of is it present in my data catalog? Data catalog metadata can include glossary terms and definitions, calculations for how things are computed, mappings of key KPIs to tables and columns, all manner of things. And then the question that you need to look at is, for this particular tool stack, what metadata can it ingest, and how, can I pull that metadata in to make that happen? So I think that's a assessment that has to be done at the when you look at just technology stack. It is absolutely possible with some of these technologies to ingest metadata from data catalogs. Some of them do it natively from their own metadata catalogs, like for example, obviously, uh, uh, like not Databricks has its
Unity
own
and
Unity
Databricks.
catalog.
Yeah.
Unity, thank you, my
Mm.
brain's not working. Unity data catalog works. And then in other cases, you might have to build a little ingestion pipeline, and they allow you to do that. If your tooling requires you to manually set up all the metadata, and you're planning for an enterprise scale solution, that's probably an indicator that you're not going to have a scalable solution, and you need to, figure out how else you can do it, right? Because ingesting metadata is going to be critical.
What else have we got here? Let's take a couple more. So you mentioned future-proofing efforts. So given the rapid change in capabilities in all these tools, how do you think about future-proofing?
So the way I think of it is that, and I think we'll probably talk about this more when we get into the examples of things when we're in some of the future webinars. But you want to have a kind of a multi-layer architecture. So you want to think of maybe like a BI gateway, I suppose, which connects to all these different systems and does the routing and orchestration, so that you can um, pull in and out components, and it will continue to work, right? And the way that all that integration layer would work is through MCP today, right? That's how it should work because that's the standard that's there. But you can imagine that rather than being locked into one particular tool, your system that you're going to put together should in fact have the ability to register multiple tools in, and then based on that, do the routing across that. So, like for example, that's something we do, Metric Insights, in our BI portal, in AI portal. It's something you could build on your own, or you can use other capabilities that do it. But having that kind of a front end capability that does governance orchestration at the domain level, connecting to the right MCP tools to answer things, I think is very important to achieving flexibility. Otherwise, you are stuck with whatever it is, whatever specific technology you've picked.
So we are over time here. There's a couple more questions. We'll be sure to answer those over email afterwards and share those with people. But thank you everyone for sticking with us and going through this session. Hopefully it was interesting to you. Would encourage you to come back for the next one where we're going to basically put these ideas into a playbook that hopefully is somewhat actionable as you think about this stuff in your organization. But thank you, Marius, and look forward to talking to people next time.
Thanks everyone for joining.